What's up, skeptics? Thomas Westbrook here. In my last video, I mentioned that I was in Florida to help with the protest of the Make America Straight Again conference. The conference was held in the Orlando area on the anniversary of the Pulse Nightclub shootings and advocated for the death of gay people. If you haven't watched that video, I highly recommend that you watch that one first for the full context before watching this one.
At Revival Baptist Church, we hate homos. Amen. We hate their lifestyle. We hate what they do. LGBT dogs. We hate homosexuals around here because God hates them. Amen. We're going to believe that all the way till Jesus comes back and capital punishment for everybody that's a homo. Amen.
There's innocent people who live in this world that these people are going to corrupt if we continue to allow them to live. Therefore, they need to be put to death.
If I had a button right here on the pulpit, I could just push this button and every would fall over dead. I'll push it until it breaks. I will push it until I break my finger.
You know, I think Orlando, Florida is a little safer tonight. Now that 50, the tragedy is that more of them didn't die. I mean, the tragedy is I'm kind of upset that he didn't finish the job.
We want these people to die, that God will put them in depression so deep that they will go ahead and kill themselves since our government's not doing it.
The world tells us that homos desire to be monogamous. It's just a dude that wants to be married to another dude. I don't give a rip whether they get married or not. Stone them with stones.
The online atheist and LGBTQIA+ community had been pushing back against the NIFB for over a month. But I knew that with multiple media crews there, all it would take for this hateful church to twist the narrative in their favor would be one vitriolic protester throwing things, trespassing, or just screaming angry profanity. The church would twist it to show how they were the poor, persecuted victims being bullied for exercising their right to free speech. The NIFB church had also threatened to use Florida's loose stand your ground laws to open fire on any protesters who might get violent.
Pray that if they do any protests, that it gets violent, they have stand your ground in Florida. So if we're allowed to fight back there, so I say bring it. But anyway.
My primary goal of attending was to do everything I possibly could to prevent that and keep things from getting violent. So I set out to Florida to do everything I could to counter this hate group. They wanted us to lose our cool, and I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction or to let all of our efforts to expose and counter their hatred to ultimately culminate in a win for them. I realized I couldn't guarantee a peaceful event, and there was a small chance that I could even end up in a body bag. But I reached out to Jim Helton from the Tri-State Freethinkers and the former National Field Organizer for American Atheists for advice, considering his extensive experience with boots-on-the-ground activism and protests. I also worked with 5 different group chats coordinating different efforts leading up to the event. On the online side, the atheist YouTube community shined a light on this group and their calls for violence. The Twitter community worked to archive their footage and flag any calls for violence across different social media platforms. And there were 2 different local groups that were organizing the protest on Saturday. One had a protest permit and had been working with the cops to make sure that things went smoothly with no legal issues. The other had recruited private security and medical personnel provided by the Sawgrass Community Defense Group. The 2 groups joined forces to have the biggest impact. The field organizers of both protests welcomed me in, and honestly, they're the ones who deserve most of the credit for the event's success, and I can't thank them enough for all their hard work and meticulous planning. Now, before the event, I created a video and posted it to both event pages discouraging the protest attendees from violence of any kind, and created flyers to distribute outlining what we were there to accomplish, what we could and couldn't do legally, and how we aimed to keep things peaceful and have the biggest impact. I did my best to touch base individually with every one of the protesters who arrived, handed out flyers, and explained what we were there to do and how we aimed to accomplish it. We assigned about 20 volunteers to crowd control to keep things from getting out of hand and calm protesters down if things got heated. We had cold water and snacks available because you're not you when you're hangry.
Peaches and rainbows? Oh my god, I love that. It's so cute. Right in and rainbows? These peaches and rainbows? So good.
Oh my god, these smell so good. I love your channel, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh my gosh, I know this is hard. Thank you so much.
You want a rainbow?
Oh, yes, I want a rainbow.
With groups on both sides of the street, we encouraged people with kids or safety concerns to protest from a safe distance across the street. At first, we were worried about dividing the group up, but this actually gave our protest even more exposure. And every few minutes, cars would drive by and honk or wave a rainbow flag out their windows. The cops didn't want to have anything to do with the hate group, but due to safety concerns, there was a police presence watching from across the street at McDonald's and in the urgent care center next door. We were very careful to follow all laws and cooperate with the police. An undercover cop approached me once to ask how things were going, but the police were never called at any point during the protest by either side, nor were they needed to be. The LGBTQIA+ community really knows how to turn up. Even in a conservative town with scorching hot Florida weather and a forecast of rain, they all came with super positive attitudes, lots of enthusiasm, and a plethora of super creative signs. At one point, we stood and read off a list of the Pulse Nightclub shooting victims, and it was pretty powerful.
Leroy Valentin Fernandez, 25 years old, we stand for you.
Yes! Jason Benjamin Jaspat, 19 years old! A teenager!
As for the conference itself, while it's hard to get an exact number of attendees, based on the building size, number of cars in the parking lot, the number of people that we saw coming and going, and from a tally of the crowd in the live video feed, if I'm being generous, I would put the number of attendees right about 150, 170 max if I'm being extremely generous, and that's counting kids who didn't really have a choice of being there. Before the event, they estimated 300 people would show up. As a conference organizer myself, judging by the size of that room, there is no way you could even get 300 people in there without violating fire code. But even 150 is a really alarming number. That's a pretty massive gaggle of bigots. And their live stream had about 500 people watching before YouTube removed the videos for terms of service violations because of the hateful calls to violence. But seeing as there were over 300 downvotes, the number wasn't all that impressive. People in the live chat opposing the church's message of hate were getting censored and blocked immediately by the church, which is ironic coming from a group that claims that atheists have to rely on censorship because we don't have good arguments.
We win the debate every time, and they are dependent on censorship.
Do you know how many of my videos I've disabled the comments on? None. And I usually only block people if they're spam or just shouting slurs or something. At one point during the protest, a pastor from another church drove up just to tell us that he condemned the NIFB's message of hate and to tell us that not all churches are like that.
I'm a pastor of a church not too far from here, a youth pastor of a church, and again, not everybody feels this way, and we love you guys.
I think his heart was in the right place, but while I'm very much an atheist, I think all of us realize that.
There are a million churches in Orlando where I live. I'm not at any of them. I'm at this one because this one is trying to interfere with my daily life that I'm just trying to live.
We weren't there to take away anyone's freedom of speech or freedom of religion. But like I told the Spectrum news anchor who interviewed me, while they have the right to freedom of speech, this church does, that doesn't mean that we're not going to use our freedom to protest and freedom of assembly to stand up and use our freedom of speech to counter it and say that this is not cool. In fact, quite a few of the protesters there were actually Christians, and many had loving Bible verses on signs. Another stranger who walked up on us tried to preach to me, which was a little annoying, especially given my extremely religious background as a missionary kid, missionary, youth pastor, worship leader, etc. But while I make a lot of videos promoting science over faith and dogma, the protest wasn't the time or the place for a heated religious debate pitting philosophy and science against religious apologetics. So I just smiled at him and walked away. I was there to support the LGBTQIA+ community, not to have a debate about epistemology. In the end, the protest was a huge success. The conference goers kept their distance for the most part. Occasionally they popped their heads out to take videos or jeer at us.
I want you to look at these filthy brute beasts. We're gonna burn in hell one day.
Pastor McMurtry walked out and got within about 20 feet or so of us to film us and then walked away. I guess he was afraid of catching the gay or something, which is really kind of sad. If truth withstands scrutiny, why is this group so afraid of exposure to new ideas? Unless they know that there's a chance that they're in the wrong. You'll never broaden the mind when you fear that which is different. Fortunately, everyone kept their cool throughout the event. At one point, Pastor Anderson came right up to us to tell us how disgusting we were.
Sorry, freaks, I gotta go. Get AIDS and die.
And I actually had a street interview with him, which I'll be breaking down in an upcoming video. So make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell button so that you don't miss that. Overall, we literally mopped the floor with these bigots. I made sure to touch base with every camera crew that was there to let them know who the organizers were so that they had a point of contact and wouldn't just pull some drunk straggler out of the crowd. That included a local Fox station, Spectrum News, there was someone with an Associated Press badge, and others. All the media crews there cast us in a really good light. We're out here to counter a message of hatred with one of love.
The church holding the rally during Gay Pride Month, less than a week after the 3rd anniversary of the shooting at the Pulse Nightclub.
For them to be holding this conference so close to that and during Pride Month, that is just insult to injury.
The Lake County Sheriff's Office denied the church's request to hire off-duty deputies for security, saying the event is in, quote, poor taste. Inside the church, the pastors say they have every right to spread their anti-gay message.
It's disgusting and filthy, and you're the ones who have the guts to say it.
They advocate capital punishment for homosexuals.
It's always been that way, and we're refusing to change.
Protesters saying they will peacefully protest throughout the weekend. The pastor of the church says he hired private security.
There was no violence, trespassing, vandalism, or illegal actions of any kind. The church preached hate. We stood there in firm opposition, pushing a message of love and tolerance.
If you don't have love, we'll love you back.
I count that as a huge win. And in terms of numbers, we knocked it out of the park. It's hard to get an exact number for how many people attended the protest, but we had about 50 to 60 on one side of the road and 30 or so on the other. Plus, most people came and went throughout the day. One of the Facebook groups had 125 marked as going, 449 interested. The other had 82 marked as going, 285 interested. But there was some overlap between the two groups, so it's hard to get an exact number. If I had to estimate, I'd say between 125 and 150 people protested the event in person, not counting all of the honking cars that drove by with rainbow flags streaming out their windows. To all of the organizers and to everyone who turned up to protest, I want to give a heartfelt thank you. I also want to give a huge thank you to Data Jack, William Arnold, Adrian, Peter, and Kevin for your generous PayPal donations to help me cover my travel costs, as well as to all of my patrons for your ongoing support of my channel. This was going to be one of the tightest months for me, but thanks to you, I was able to be there in person at this event and to help take a stand against hatred and bigotry. Y'all freaking rock, and I'm really humbled by your support. Lastly, I want to talk about where to go from here. This group is currently losing the battle of ideas. They've already lost multiple YouTube channels, Facebook pages, and PayPal accounts for terms of service violations and calls for violence. A sheriff and local pastor was recently forced to resign after preaching that it was the duty of the cops to kill gay people. The media is in our favor. The narrative is ours. But all of that will change if we resort to vitriol and violence. Remember that while this group is spreading hate against the LGBTQIA+ community, and it's justifiably infuriating, and while this religious organization's message and messages like this embolden their followers to engage in violence, we can't stoop to their level or they win. Protest the events, flag their videos, Facebook posts, and tweets whenever they call for violence, and call them out wherever you see their hatred, but do it tactfully. The best move in chess is often the move that they least want you to play. They want us to become enraged and violent. We're not going to give them the satisfaction. And if you see other groups in other circumstances that you simply disagree with but aren't extremist organizations like the NIFB calling for violence, don't instantly resort to deplatforming or attempts at censorship. Learn how to counter their position with logic, reason, and science. In the process, you'll enrich yourself and help others. Now, in the next few days, I have a couple treats for you. First, on this trip, I may or may not have dressed up in a giant pumpkin costume at one point to troll Pastor McMurtry. Don't worry, I was very safe the whole time. If you don't know what all the pumpkin stuff is about, watch my previous video for the full context on that. You can get full access to that video right now if you're one of my patrons. And second, I'm going to be breaking down a street interview that I had with Pastor Steven Anderson and exposing his horrible, hateful message.
I wish that every homo would die.
So subscribe and hit that bell button for both of those videos. And in the meantime, thank you again to everyone for making this trip such an amazing success. Oh, and real quick, one of the highlights of this trip was getting the entire group of protesters to chant "Don't drink the Kool-Aid" outside of the NIFB conference. Check it out.
Don't drink the Kool-Aid! Don't drink the Kool-Aid! Don't drink the Kool-Aid!
Thank you to everyone for your ongoing support. If you like this video and appreciate my work as a humanist and secular activist, and you want to see me do more stuff like this, please consider pledging a couple bucks on patreon.com/holykoolaid or make a one-time donation on PayPal. The link to that is in the description below. And as always, dare to be curious, but
don't